our next keynote speaker and second to last session of Excellentium 2026, I'd like to welcome Dr. Cesar Sanz, who brings together perspectives as a clinician, researcher, and global pharmaceutical leader. Dr. Sanz leads medical affairs across Europe, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and Canada at Amgen, and has over 20 years of experience in vaccines, oncology, and clinical research, as well as a very impressive career in medicine. Please, a round of applause.
Thank you, everybody. First of all, I'm really delighted to be here. I appreciate very much the invitation. And it just reminded me so much last night when we were chatting about a similar experience I had many years ago, when I was kind of trying to make sense of my next steps. I think what's really clear from the interactions I had last night is that you're going to be living in a very challenging context because the world is changing a lot and very fast. And that's really going to make a big difference versus perhaps what I experienced. I know some of you have been looking me up in LinkedIn. I saw that. And you probably noticed that, over time I've been having different roles of increasing responsibility, bigger teams. Yeah, there seems to be a bit of an echo. Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, good. So essentially I've been around in the business of leadership for a while. But yet, when I was reflecting about, what is it that I want to share with you today, a lot of it actually, in terms of the most important experiences, have happened in the last 5 years. And this concept of leading for impact is not just like a nice epitome added to leadership. It's actually a very, fundamentally different concept from the way, at least I understood leadership in the early days of my career. And why is this concept of leadership for impact? And I will be sharing with you, a couple of examples. One of them is actually connected to the idea of motivation. And one thing that you're going to see, and I've seen that very clearly in my journey, people like yourselves, are motivated primarily by finding something that in terms of purpose, aligns to what you are looking after. It's not so much about progression in career. It's not so much about money. It's actually about finding something that you feel makes sense, and that I see very clearly in the organization. And that's why I think this concept of leadership for impact is going to become even more important because your teams will be looking for that. So you need to really be able to react to that. So So again, I'm going to be reflecting on sort of my journey. So maybe some of the things I will say may not be so academic. Some of them will be. I will also, you will see that in some aspects I do disagree with some things that have been said by others. There's nothing right or wrong, it's just different perspectives. But again, I really want you to think of it as a journey. It's a journey that you're starting now, and it's a journey you need to work on throughout. You never become a leader and then that's it. It's always something you need to continue to work on. And as I said, the reason why leading for impact is becoming more and more important is because the world is changing. The world is fundamentally transforming, and that's really impacting, the business that we do. So, if I reflect on what I do, and I work in a big pharma context these days, a lot of what I do is connected to making innovation accessible to patients. And there's lots of things happening in the world. First of all, I was chatting with a couple of you over lunch about, how competition these days actually starts, from minute one in development, because you're never alone in a particular therapy area. There's always many other companies who are looking at similar ideas, similar concepts. So you're really competing all day from minute one, and you really have to understand how that is changing. There's also increasing pressure, regulatory pressure, but there's also political pressure. We were talking earlier today about some of the dynamics around access, how things are changing, and how that is impacting obviously how we think of adding value as organizations. Also, organizations are becoming increasingly complex. This is something that you will struggle with because you're coming primarily from an academic environment where it's very hierarchical. You are student, then you become a fellow, and then or a postdoc. Then at some point in time, you will start your own sort of thing, or you will become an attending in a hospital, and then you go up, and essentially that ladder of hierarchy is connected to expertise and to knowledge. That is actually not true in the real world. It's a matrix, and you're going to have to work with a lot of people. There was a point made before by one of the panelists about the importance of cross-functional work. That's going to become even more important. So being able to manage a matrix effectively, that's going to be another aspect that is really influencing how things are evolving. And then, of course, technology and transformation. The world is changing. The way physicians are practicing medicine these days is completely different. One of the things that I'm looking at, as part of my job is actually how that is changing. And right now, if you look, for instance, at Europe, about 40–50% of physicians are actually using AI on a daily basis to make decisions on their patients. But patients are also looking into AI to understand what their physicians are saying. And not only that, I was sharing last night over dinner with some of you that I recently had the opportunity of engaging with the leadership of a scientific society, and one thing they are working on is developing patient twins, digital twins. They're looking at 100+ parameters, all the way from social demographic elements to biological data, to essentially develop a twin for every patient, so that when I'm, as a physician, I'm thinking, what do I do for this patient? I can actually give it a try digitally. And then also my patient, can do a bit the same thing. So, and this thing, this sounds like a bit, science fiction. They actually plan to have a prototype ready for clinical testing next year. So again, things are really moving very, very fast, and this is actually what's driving this need, to think about, what's the impact that we're looking at. When I started my career, I spent the first 21 years of my career in industry after I moved from clinical practice in one company, in one big company. I was working for Merck. Merck at the time was about 100,000 employees, so it's almost like a city altogether into one company. And really, what made a great leader, and that was how I understood my job, and how expectations were given to me in terms of leadership, was about managing essentially my team, initially small, then bigger, then bigger, then bigger. But it really was about managing the leader. I was an expert in the company. I knew the company, I knew how to navigate it. It was about helping my team, manage to that complexity. And I was actually considered a great leader, but essentially what I was a great manager. The reality is that leadership, and again, this is particularly true when you think about this concept of leadership for impact. Leadership is not measured by the size of your team. You are not a bigger leader or a greater leader because you have more people under you than the other guy. Leadership is about your ability to actually drive change, and to drive change in response to a vision that you need to develop for what's going on, in the world. Again, it's not that sort of status position. It's not about how many people report into you. It's not about making things change. It's about defining what that change needs to be for the organization to be able to react to that changing environment. And then the other aspect that is very important is that when you are a leader, and the more prominent you become in the organization, I have now in my organization about 700 people below me. Of course I don't know them all, but they all know me, and all eyes on me. So everything that you do, everything that you say, every movement that you make on stage is going to be interpreted. It's going to have a ripple effect somehow, and that's something you need to be aware of as well, and you need to manage. So again, leadership is about not being in charge. It's more about defining what that future aspect will be. And this is why, and again, this is what I was referring to in the beginning. If I reflect back on my last 5 years, this is where I would say the definition, the expectation of what a great leader is has really changed. So now we are in this moment of essentially making people embrace change. And I think one of the best definitions I like of a great leader is, to me, is somebody who's actually able to make people do things that they never thought they would be able to do. That's what you will be remembered for as a leader. So again, this is really an important aspect to reflect on. In my sort of years of leadership, I've come across two misconceptions, which are actually quite a bit of spread out, and you will come across them, and maybe you are caught up in a couple of those. The first thing is that many leaders think their role is about defending their team, representing their team, protecting the team from whatever happens in the company, and essentially it's very easy to fall in this trap. Why? Because actually the teams like it. the teams will see, oh, this is a great guy, he had my back, when I was in trouble, essentially he provided the solution. So that's something that, you also, as a leader, you also like to be rewarded. So when you see signs of recognition, you like it, you appreciate it, but it doesn't mean that, this is the thing that you need to do. Because, what happens is that, you actually create certain misbehaviors in the organization. So when, as a leader, you have to create psychological safety for sure. And a lot of it is about, making sure people understand how to live with uncertainty, and change brings uncertainty. And again, we live in a changing world. But you need to make sure people take ownership, and they understand they need to get exposed themselves to be able to to drive that change that we're talking about. So again, that's an important one to keep in mind. The other one that to me this was actually particularly a trap, at some point in time in my career, and it was actually a colleague of mine who kind of opened my eyes on this, is this idea of understanding that you are not the advocate of your team, but you are not either the messenger of the company. It's not about asking your team to do or making sure your team does what the company wants to do. It's about essentially being more that translator, that authentic, that element of authenticity that can really bring the understanding of that context, that changing context, to the teams. We talked about that before in the panel discussion. That's a very important aspect of leadership. You need to bring those things together. They need to be trustworthy for your teams, and that's an important element. And again, a lot of it is about authenticity. So, the way, I would invite you to think about it, and again, this is a pretty standard formula you may find in many of these leadership books, is that, this idea of impact is really a combination of different elements. You need to develop a vision. You need to be visionary. You have to be, as a leader, thinking of what's going to happen, not today, but, a few years from now. You have to be mindful of people, and people goes all the way from the individuals to the organization. And then, of course, at some point in time, things have to happen. So there's also this element of execution, and that's what really kind of brings things together. I would, again, there's lots of stuff written out there that you can check. There's frameworks actually that can be quite useful. These are two that I like to use because I think they combine different elements that I think are important. This idea of establishing a future, imagining the future, what it should be like, this idea of navigating uncertainty. Again, so look out and find whatever sort of you feel comfortable with. But there is the point here is that leadership is not so much something, how to say, congenital, in the sense that you sort of bring it up with your work. It's something that you can actually learn and you can actually practice. So again, look for resources and get supported for that matter. My challenge to you would be, as you start, becoming leaders, and again, you're going to be in that journey, very soon. Some of you already are. Start thinking about what is it that sort of legacy that you would like people to remember you for 5 years from now. Because again, you need to combine the sort of the present with that sort of visionary element. And that's something you need to put time to. It doesn't happen like that. I mean, there's many elements that unless you think about them proactively, you will not realize. And I would say leadership happens at 4 levels. The first one is yourselves. Then of course, people and organizations, as I said, and then society. And obviously in my case, I connected to the purpose of improving patients' lives. You will need to to understand what that means to you. And the word network was mentioned before. And I saw yesterday many attempts of networking in the sense of, essentially, looking for a new job. I mean, that's going to happen to you. I mean, you're going to have your network, that the opportunities will come through them. I don't think I ever had to apply to a job ever than my first job. Otherwise it all came through my network. But I would like to invite you to think of this network, for instance, as a thinking partner, as you try to understand what's going on in the world. Because most of the challenges you'll need to lead your organizations through are going to come from the environment. So, and when you are in one organization, you get a very biased view of the situation. So again, engage with each other, discuss about, things that worry you, what's going on in terms of, technology, how clinical practice is changing, whatever it is that you are working on, spend time out there, not only with your teams, but also with people that can give you a bit of a sense of what's happening. I do spend quite a bit of my time, talking to people that are simply telling me what's going on. I give you the example of this engagement with the leadership of a scientific society. It just tells me how mature people are in their thinking about something that we're going to have to react to because we're dealing with them on a daily basis. So look, over time, I had my clinical expertise, I had my research experience, I sort of went through the ladder in the company. The question is, all these sort of expertise-based elements, do they really make me a strong leader? And I'm not sure. I don't think so. In fact, I think what's really important is, to become a strong leader for impact. It's more about the skills that you develop, and some of them, you develop by doing, by failing. That was mentioned a number of times. The one thing I would say about failing is that failing, is tough because it's failure. Nobody likes to fail, but it's actually even tougher when you fail in front of many people. And when you are a leader, that's going to happen. You're going to fail miserably in front of many people. And you're going to feel challenged and ashamed of doing so. The only answer to that is vulnerability. So embrace that word. Vulnerability is actually a very potent concept if you use it right. It's going to take you a long, long way. So I really want to leave you that message on that. And again, learn from the failure. That's very important. And share those learnings with others because that will make you more authentic and stronger in front of their eyes. The other aspect is that mindset matters more than anything. You have to be willing to be a leader, and you have to really, again, understand the impact you're having on others by the things you do. Communication is one aspect that is very important, and you have to communicate with empathy. You have to communicate, with strategic thinking applied to it as well. Because again, everything has to make sense. Decision making is an important thing. What actually drives me the most about leadership is that when you make decisions, you actually don't make the best. You make the best decision possible at the time, and really trying to. And it's never a perfect decision. I love making imperfect decisions. So this is something that you need to also kind of embrace and feel comfortable with, because again, coming from a STEM background like many of you do, it's not nice. You like to have all the data points. You like to do what the data tells you. So again, this is just kind of the opposite. You need to take a bit of a different approach here. Now, the good news, in my view, is that actually leadership is something that is not innate. It can actually be learned. It can be practiced. It can, you can become good at it. Many times people confuse charisma with leadership. And charisma is one attribute that some people have. That's innate. Some people are very charismatic, others are not. But actually, charisma can become also a bit of a trap because it can take you more into that sort of complacent type of leadership where you make people happy, but in the end, at some point in time, nothing really happens. But to learn how to be a strong leader, you need to stay humble. You need to ask questions. You need to come close to people who actually can help you. And you're going to have that opportunity over time. There will be mentors. There will be coaches that can help you. There will be peers that can help you kind of build that. And then there's a number of habits that you simply need to practice. You have to be mindful about them. I'm just putting there a few, but again, it's about being conscious and really, keeping those in mind all the time, because again, you're being under many eyes, as a leader. This is just a number of reports of different programs, coaches, assessments I've gone through as a leader in the last 10 years. Again, you need to work on it. It's never over. You're never a great leader, and then that's it. I'm done. Now I can just sort of enjoy, the ride. You have to work on it, and again, you have to stay humble. You have to accept that you're never going to be the strongest leader, and there's always an opportunity for you to improve. And one thing that is key is to build self-awareness as a leader. We have strengths. I have strengths. I have also weaknesses. And there's many different models. This is actually one model I like in particular. It's called the Insights model. It's actually a company that makes a business out of this. But essentially what they do is they use a color coding to define different types of energy that we all have as leaders. So it goes with this color coding. So, if you are red, you are the driver person, competitive, demanding. If you are blue, you are more the analytical guy, the one who wants to have the information to make decisions. Green is about, people. It's about, caring and, being patient, empathetic, etc. And then, the yellow part is the sociable sort of element of it. So, on a good day, we have our profile, but then on a bad day, we also have our profile. And behaviors which can be, which can sound quite positive, they can become all of a sudden derailers. And the problem is that when you're on a bad day, that's your less conscious type of, behavior. Those things can actually, flourish up and can really influence how you communicate or how you, behave towards your teams. So this is myself. Okay, so I'm very blue and very red. Okay, so again, not surprising with a scientific background. You see, my green is really not that high, which means that I need to be mindful of it. I need to make it high when it's needed. And my yellow is a bit higher, but again, I'm not like the you will not find me. I'm not the party guy in the company. But you see, when I'm put under stress, I actually become even more red, more blue, much less green, and definitely no yellow. So again, it's by being conscious that you actually can manage it. Okay, this is my personality. There's nothing I can do about it, but I can modulate it. And it's very important to be self-aware to be able to modulate it effectively. When you look at, this model actually goes a bit more into a bit more complex. And essentially, as you can see, I'm more the reformer guy. So I can actually drive, I can define what change can be, and I can be quite effective at driving it. But I'm not the helper. I'm not the supporter. That's not my nature. Okay. Now, before there was something mentioned about diversity, and this is where I think it's very important to bring it together. Because what you don't have, maybe others in your team can have it. And one concept I believe is fundamental is this idea of shared leadership. You're never going to be a leader alone. You're going to have a leadership around you. Those are people that can help you. And when you build those teams, you have to try to bring that diversity. Then reality happens. This is my team. You see, we are all very similar. I have, this one person there, the easy person at the bottom. She's the only green person in the team. But it's interesting because what this tells you is that there are biases. I didn't get to hire these people, but probably the person who hired me hired them as well. So we all like to hire people who are exactly like ourselves. So sometimes you have to be, again, very conscious about how you build your leadership team, and you have to look proactively for things that you don't have. Because otherwise you will only get people that will reinforce your pluses, but also your weaknesses. Okay, so again, be mindful of this concept of diversity. It's not that easy. Again, this is what I deal with on my daily basis, and this is the team I have to deal, with all the change that I need to deal with. Now, the other aspect is the people and the company, the culture, the famous company culture. I've worked for 3 companies. I worked for Merck, big established company. Then I worked for, at some point in time, I decided I had to do something, in the context of the pandemic. So I went all for purpose. I moved to Moderna. I was there, 3 years in the middle of all the mess. And then at some point in time, I went back to another company, Amgen, which is, a mid-size, biopharmaceutical company, big pharma, sort of in between. And I just went to ChatGPT and I said, give me a table, because I didn't want to be, claimed that I was thinking of the company this or that way. When you then try to put that into a framework of, structured versus agile, and then execution versus innovation, this is what you get. And you can easily guess which company is what, from the ones I said. Now, the reality is that, you as a leader have to modulate. Because I couldn't lead at MSD the same way that I was leading at Moderna or that I'm leading now at Amgen. So it's very important to be mindful of that and to understand, what are the drivers that are going to be most important when you think of your strategy. So again, I will not go into the details, but this is something very important because, it was said earlier today, like almost every time you go to an organization, you have to relearn to be a leader in that organization. That's very important. Let me, finish up by sharing a couple of examples of sort of the 2, I would say, most important lead for impact experiences I've had in the last 5 years. So first, Moderna. When I went to Moderna, and by the way, I would earlier this morning, one of the speakers said that it's very important, for you guys to keep in mind what you want to do. And right now, you are young, you are full of energy, you are starting your careers. Yesterday I was talking to some of you, You're looking about, moving to other countries, doing different things. At some point in time, life kicks in, and you will get a family, and you will buy a house, you will have a mortgage, all these things that happen to people, and then you will become a bit more conservative about your moves. That will happen. Stay to the best extent possible genuine. I think it's always important that at some point in time you're able to say, you know what, heck with everything, this is what I really want to do. And that was a bit my Moderna moment, when we were in the middle of the pandemic. As a physician, I felt I had to do something. And then, I got this phone call. Do you want to, so, I was working in Big Merck, 100,000 employees. And then I get this phone call, and they tell me, do you want to be the first medical employee outside the US for the company? And I said, yes. I had no team, I had nothing, I just went there. I knew what I knew about COVID. 3 days later, I was thrown into a call with the Ministry of Health of Israel just to discuss the data of the vaccine. It was like, jumping into the vacuum, but I really felt I had to do it because it was all about purpose. And I landed in a crazy organization, like many of these biotechs that you are probably working with are in a way, where, people have a lot of purpose, a strong sense of purpose, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. So that was really nice, and that was actually the big leverage I had. I had to leverage that, and what was very important to me was to develop a vision very rapidly because I had to communicate that to that organization. And it was high level because I couldn't get details, but it had to be consistent throughout. Then I had to adapt. I do think working for a small company is very different from working for a big pharma. The pace of decision making is very different. What was perhaps even harder for me was making decisions on much less information. I was not comfortable. But then I learned that with 60% of the information, as opposed to 90%, you can actually pretty much make the same type of decisions. It does take an effort, though, to accommodate to that. I knew what I had to do, I just didn't know how to do it in such a context. And for me, for instance, one of the biggest hurdles was dealing with legal, because they were in this sort of transition. It was mentioned before, from an R&D organization to a commercial organization. So that was a big challenge. And then the other test of leadership was hyper growth. When I joined, we were 2,000 employees. When I left, we were 6,000. Every time you would go to a meeting, there would be new people in the room. Every time I would be telling my story, I was telling it to new people. And then obviously I also had to live with making hiring mistakes. I was hiring so fast that because I had to build a team, that I did hire people that I shouldn't have hired, and I had to deal with it. So again, those were elements that really played there. The other situation I would like to quickly share with you, and then we can open for questions, is about what I'm actually dealing with right now, which is really this, how do we actually drive technology, and we transform the organization based on the technology advancements that we see everywhere. And one thing I've learned is that it's not actually about technology, it's about the people. Actually, I'm not myself, too much into, I'm not really the guru of artificial intelligence. I'm just sort of an average user. But I had the feeling in the beginning that it was about choosing the right tool. Will it be Copilot, or will it be ChatGPT, or will it be whatever? It's not about that. It's actually about people. What I'm dealing with is, with people who are actually concerned that they will lose their jobs. People that, they defend status quo. I'll give you an example that I was just discussing the other day with my leadership team. We're going to go into a new therapy area. I do expect about a tenfold increase in the number of medical information queries we're going to be getting as an organization. And I was telling my team, there's no way we're going to hire 10 more people. So how do you do it? It's going to have to be through technology. And how do we, make that happen for our teams? So you need to develop really trust in the organization, and the way you do it is by running pilots, growing that progressively, getting the buy-in. You need to have low-hanging fruits identified, and then success stories that you can use to revert back to the organization and bring them along. The other thing is that you need to leverage the unexpected. One thing that has been playing to my advantage in driving this change is that all of a sudden the medical organization felt they were actually ahead of the rest of the organization. For once, they felt that they were getting better. We gave access to ChatGPT to the whole organization. That only happened in medical, not in commercial. They were just taking pride of that. So I said, okay, let's take advantage of it. So again, all these things are things that you need to manage. But it is really a journey that I'm still going through. And again, all these elements about living for impact are key elements that we need to think about. So as I close, again, I want to leave you with this idea that living for impact is not about having answers. It's about choosing how you make that difference every day. It's about staying close to your teams, helping them deal with that uncertainty, and helping them navigate what they think may be essentially unattainable for them. That's really what makes a difference. And then just a few elements in terms of I think you see here things that have been mentioned before, so I don't need to repeat them. Perhaps the only thing I want to emphasize is this idea of purpose. Leverage that; it's very, very powerful. So with that, I will pause, and then maybe we can have some time for questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Avantika. I'm from the US. I have a question regarding the color energies. When you're not in charge of building your team and it happens that the team does share some of those same color energies that you were mentioning as your team did in that moment, how do you kind of ensure that diversity of perspective or avoiding getting stuck in a stalemate when you clash with another teammate who's also having a bad day and let's say the controlling color energy rises to the forefront, and just kind of how do you manage for that?
So you train for it. So for instance, last year in December, I brought my team together and we had a workshop dedicated to this, because when I was we could have gone into much more detail, but essentially, when you analyze my report, you will see that there's tips as to how you need to communicate with me if you want to engage me. The things that I would probably like based on my profile, the things that I would not perhaps like so much based on my profile. And then that you have the same for the others. So essentially the idea is that you become, again, self-aware about yourself, but also about others in your team, so you know which are the levers that you need to pull when you want to communicate or when you want to... So I'll give you one example. One thing that I always underestimate, always. And the biggest issues I've had as a leader have always been connected to that to a certain extent is communication. I'm a fast thinker. I think things are obvious. They are obvious to me. They should be obvious to everybody. So I just don't, put attention to it. I just don't, again, it's not natural. It doesn't come natural. So I always have to have people reminding me, Cesar, you need to slow down. You need to spend time talking. You need to repeat. People, some people need time. They just need time. They need to hear it in different ways. They need to hear, the why behind. And so again, this is a bit like, this sort of, menu choice example we had before. You need to acknowledge that is actually something that happens in your team, in your organization. So, and you need to cater for that. And again, this is something that you can train on. It's not, so that's really a message I want to leave you with. By being self-aware of yourself and your shared leadership team, you're going to be able to really get much farther than if you think that you know it all and then you can really manage everything by yourself.
Hello. Thank you for the great talk. I'm Sakina. I'm from Oxford, originally from India. I'm very curious to understand, what do you anchor yourself to when there is maybe a lot of uncertainty and you don't know enough about a decision that you need to make, and at the same time, you have to make decisions or maybe hold off for one. So what is that one thing that you would anchor to such in like a very fast-paced environment? How do you prioritize decisions?
So I think what I think is very important when you don't know, just acknowledge it. I think that's something that brings, again, we all have a bit this idea that because you are the most senior person or you are the leader, you have to know it all. It's a bit like this, like this myth about fathers, like my son thinks that I know everything and you want to keep that alive for as long as you want. The reality is that you don't know, and I think these days, again, it was said before, people deserve and like to be treated like adults. So if you don't know, just say it, acknowledge it. That is vulnerability, and that's something that really goes a long way. People will really, people will really follow you. if you build the trust before as well. You know, when you trust your leader, and at some point in time, you know, he or she tells you, I don't know, but you know, follow me, you're gonna follow the person. You know, if you don't trust the person, that's gonna be different. So you know, the trust building piece, that's something that you need to work on, because it's something that you don't build overnight, but you leverage overnight when it comes. So I think that's something that I would suggest you you know, you think about. The other question, if you can remember, remind me.
What do you anchor yourself to? Because you still need to make a tough decision, but you don't know enough. So what would you then do to prioritize whether or not to execute something in that moment?
So, you know, I will not repeat what was said before, but there are different ways of making decisions. And you know, I think the idea, again, is really to, you know, to reflect on what's perhaps the best way to make that decision, depending on the context. One thing that I like to do is to acknowledge the risk of that decision. Because if, you know, sometimes you take decisions that, you know, you are, again, very certain about because you have a lot of information. So in a way, the risk of not, you know, making the right decision is rather low. But sometimes it's not the case. You really make, like, you know, sort of bold decisions and you know, you don't really have a strong basis for. If you acknowledge that, you know, they may be wrong decisions, I think that gives you the margin to go back and revisit without losing your credibility. So I think that's an important element to play with. And again, it will depend a bit on the situation. But you know, I'll give you one example that, you know, we are dealing with right now. You know, when you look at how pharmaceutical companies interact with the medical community, a lot of it is through medical education. And one point I'm making to my team, so you know, so we have, you know, MSLs that go around setting up these meetings and this and that. But you know, one thing that I'm discussing with my teams is that you know, physicians don't need pharmaceutical companies anymore, you know, to access data. Because you actually, I don't do it myself. You know, there's a particular program in my company running now. I actually am getting more information through the outside than through the inside. So, you know, these things just happen. So at some point in time, you know, our customer is going to be more, you know, all these AI, you know, agents that are beginning to pop up. You know, that's going to transform the way I operate. Do I know how? I don't. But I definitely I can start making certain decisions based on that. And I think that's where, you know, this element of uncertainty becomes very, very critical to understand and to manage. But again, you need to really be very transparent to your teams. And you know, one thing I've done, for instance, you know, medical information I was mentioning before, you know, the classical ways you have people that answer the phone, you know, write emails. I mean, now you have, you know, bots that can do that. So at some point in time, you know, we need to start thinking about what will happen 2 years from now, because there are people under us that maybe, again, they may need to transform their jobs based on that. So, you know, you need to acknowledge you don't know what will happen, but that you need to start thinking about it. And that's where I think it helps to, you know, to do that.
We have time for one more quick question.
Hey, I'm Camila from Ecuador. Thank you so much for your talk. So, in early stage biotech entrepreneurs, how do you keep teams motivated during periods of uncertainty or setbacks, so that the entrepreneur don't give up on their startups?
You know, my experience in that sort of world has been limited to those 3 years, and it was a moment of high motivation. But my experience was that motivation was never an issue. You know, people, again, they really like what they do. They really see the sort of the big dream behind that. What was driving actually more demotivation of the teams was the lack of process. That, you know, sometimes getting things done just gets very hard, because at some point in time, when these companies start becoming a bit bigger, they really lack the basics in terms of processes to make things happen. So, you know, I never had to deal with an issue in terms of lack of motivation because of not understanding the purpose, or because, you know, there was, you know, some program didn't fly. I mean, people accept that risk very, very much. I had to deal with a lot of frustration based on the fact that, you know, we were not able to make things that, you know, should be easy to do, but they just couldn't be made because of the lack of processes and structure. Okay, well, thank you, and good luck.